Okay, welcome everyone to class number 3 in our Esther series. We're going to continue in chapter 2, and I want to point out before we get into chapter 2 that until this point, we still haven't met a single Jewish person in the entire Tanakh. We've been through the entire first chapter, the first 22 psukim. We'll go a few more until we meet the first Jewish person, but this entire Megillah until now, so far, has only spoken about non-Jewish people. So we've spoken last time about the issue of drinking and alcohol and how there was a Persian custom to decide on weighty matters deliberately while they were drunk so that everyone would be as honest as they possibly could be. And then only after when they got sober, they would discuss it again. And if they still agreed with what they said while they were drunk, then they would pass what they said they wanted to pass into law. So into Parag Beis, now the king has done away with Vashti. Either we understand that according to the Pshat that he sent her away, or according to the Midrashim that he actually killed her. But nevertheless, chapter 2 begins, after these things, when the king had calmed down, when Achashverosh was now calm, and now he was sober. So sober in two ways, sober A, from the alcohol, and sober B, from his anger and his madness. Zachar as Vashti, he remembered Vashti, his queen, and he remembered what he did, what he had decreed against her. And the Megillah is very enigmatic here. It doesn't tell us what he decreed against her, and that's why there's this difference between the Pshat and the Midrash. Nowhere does the Megillah say explicitly that he killed her, but the Megillah tells us here the king remembered what he had done, what he decreed. And Na'arei HaMelech, the king's young servants, they went to the king and they said, let us find a lot of these beautiful young women, these virgins, and to be sought out for the king. And I once made the mistake of referring to this as a pageant. There's no way that one can refer to this as a pageant. This was a forced gathering of many young women throughout the entire empire, and a pretty brutal affair, if one thinks about it. And it's really quite a dark moment in Tanakh. We don't think about it so often because Purim is such a happy holiday. We're in a very happy mood, a lighthearted mood when we read the Megillah, but this is quite a dark moment where a lot of the young unmarried women are now being forcibly taken to the king's palace to see if they're going to be a match for the king. So the young advisors continue in their advice. V'yafged Hamelech bekidim, the king should appoint officers b'chol medinos malchusa in all of the king in all the countries and all the areas of the kingdom, and they should gather all these young women, the beautiful women, to Shushan Habira, to the women's quarters with Haggai, the Sris, the eunuch. He's going to be the one to guard the women and to give them their cosmetics. The hanara shartitav be'enei hamelech, the woman who finds the most grace in the eyes of the king, Timloch tachas Vashti, she should become the queen. Vayitav adavar be'enei hamelech v'yaskein, and the thing was good to Achashverosh. He liked the idea, and that's exactly what he did. Now the Megillah doesn't say whether he had a second conversation about this when drunk as well, or if he only had one drunk and one when sober, but nevertheless, this was what the advisors advised, and this is what the king did. Pasuk 5. After 26 psukim, here we have our first Jewish person in the Megillah. Ish Yehudi haya b'Shushan Habira. There was a Jewish person in Shushan Habira, Shmuel Mordechai ben Yair ben Shimi ben Kish, Ish Yemini. He was from the tribe of Binyamin. His name was Mordechai. Asher Hagla Yerushalayim. He was exiled from Yerushalayim. Im Hagola Asher Hagla Sa'im Yechanya Melech Yehuda. With Yechanya, the king of Yehuda, Asher Hagla Nebuchadnezzar Melech Babel. So during the Babylonian exile, he had been sent away from Yerushalayim and he'd made his way into Persia. But he omenes Hadassah, he Esther, and he was a foster parent to Hadassah, who was also known as Esther, Bas Dodo, his uncle's daughter. Ki ein la aveim, she had no parents, she was an orphan. V'hanara yafas toar v'tovas mara, she was exceedingly beautiful. V'mos avia v'ima, lakacha Mordechai lo labas. When her father and mother died, Mordechai took her as a daughter. When he heard about this king's new law, when they gathered these many women to Shushan Habira, al yad Haggai, they took Esther as well to the house of the king, el yad Haggai, through Haggai, the guardian of the women. And this woman was very good to the king's eyes. The king liked Esther very much. Fatisa chesed lefanav. And they gave her all these beautiful gifts. And the 7 They gave her 7 naros, 7 maids that they gave her, which were fitting to be given to her, mi beis hamelech, from the house of the king, vayishaneha ve'es na'aroseh latov beis hanoshim, and they changed her living arrangements to the best of the place among the house of where the women were kept. So I want to just pause here and point out a couple of interesting things, in my opinion. The Gemara in Megillah, Daf Yud Gimel, talks about this pasuk, about these Sheva Na'aros, these 7 maids that were given to her. And according to Rava, why was she given 7 maids, and why does the Megillah tell us about this? Because that's how she counted Shabbos. She counted Shabbos through these 7 maids. She would have one serving her every single day, and that's how she kept Shabbos. Same pasuk, Vayishaneha ves na'aroseh latov beis hanashim. They gave her the best of what was in the house of the women. On that part of the pasuk, there's a fascinating 3-way machlokes in terms of what Esther ate when she was in the house of the king. According to Rav, she ate Jewish food. She ate kosher food. Okay, she was a nice, frum Jewish girl. She only ate kosher food. According to Shmuel, however, and Shmuel and Rav always argue with each other. If you ever know someone who anything they say, you just have to argue with him, that's Rav and Shmuel. No matter what Rav says, Shmuel is going to say the opposite. No matter what Shmuel says, Rav is going to say the opposite. So Rav says she ate Jewish food, she ate kosher. Shmuel comes right along on brand and says she didn't eat kosher food. She ate pig neck or pig back, some kind of a part of the pig. And Rabbi Yochanan gives a third opinion, maybe combining the two. It's not that she explicitly ate Jewish food or that she explicitly ate treif, but she went vegetarian and was a little more subtle and was able to hide the fact that she was Jewish while also not eating explicitly kosher food. But on this opinion of Shmuel, who says that she ate pig, this is a very troubling idea. And whether she ate treif or not, there are many different explanations or discussions given in the later rabbis as to what Shmuel might have meant. So I know 5 different approaches to this question. I want to go through them very briefly. According to the Targum Sheni, Esther gave the gifts that she was given to her non-Jewish friends, and she never tasted the king's wine herself. Rashi, when talking about this opinion of Shmuel, says she was forced to eat pig, and therefore she wasn't punished. Tosfos, who's similar to the Rav and Shmuel dynamic, are constantly arguing with Rashi. Tosfos says, heaven forbid. She never ate pig, and it's a scandal to say that she did. And finally, the next 3 opinions, all quoted by the Ben Yehoyada, who lived in the 19th century, based on the Rambam. Rambam writes that pig meat is very, very harmful and is not very healthy. He writes this in the Moreh Nevuchim. So it's not possible that they served her pure pig meat, says the Ben Yehoyada. Rather, they mixed a little bit of pig fat into kosher food, and that was known as what we call batal b'shishim. It was mixed in. 1 in 60 parts were pig fat, and therefore the entire dish in total was technically not treif. Something to be treif has to be less than 1 in 60, according to this opinion. It doesn't always work exactly that way, but in general, 1 in 60 or less than 1 in 60 does not render something non-kosher. If a little bit of milk falls into a cold meat dish, if it's less than 1 in 60, it wouldn't become treif necessarily. So it says batal b'shishim, and that's the way he gets out of it in the first way. Second approach of the Ben Yehoyada says that the Arizal from the 16th century Kabbalist writes that Esther knew the Shem HaMaforash, knew the name of Hashem, and she would have a demon take her form whenever Achashverosh called for her to sleep with her. And so then the Ben Yehoyada, using that explanation, says that when she was called to eat non-kosher meat, she might have done the same thing. And it wasn't her eating the non-kosher meat, but rather a demon that took her place. And finally, opinion number 3 of the Ben Yehoyada, there's a Gemara in Chulin 109b, where Yalta, this woman, is telling Rabbi Nachman, who's her husband, that every forbidden pleasure in the Torah has a permitted counterpart. And there she said that just as we're not allowed to eat pig, but there's a certain kind of fish whose brain tastes exactly like a pig. So the Ben Yehoyada suggests that they didn't feed her pig itself, but rather a certain fish brain which tastes exactly like pig. So what's my point of mentioning all of this? That clearly there's a problem here in the Megillah itself, that Esther, this wonderful Jewish girl who brought about the salvation of the Jewish people, is in a situation where she's kind of compromised and maybe has to eat non-kosher food. So what did she do? Did she eat non-kosher food? Did she not eat non-kosher food? And we can kind of see that the rabbis, both in the Gemara and later the Rishonim and later the Achronim, are grappling with this. And they're trying to come up with any solution they can to say that Esther, in reality, did not eat non-kosher food. And finally, so let's go back into The Megillah, Pasuk 10, Lo Hagida Esther as Ama ves Malata. Esther did not tell anybody what her nation was. Ki Mordechai tziva aleha asher lo sagir. Mordechai had told her not to tell, and therefore she did not tell. So again, this problem that Esther didn't reveal her people, and if she didn't reveal her people, what could she have eaten in the Megillah? We've seen a lot of solutions, some more outlandish than others, and some may have been true. Others are mentioned elsewhere in Tanakh, that Daniel, Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah went vegetarian as well. Of course, they weren't hiding the fact that they were Jewish, but nevertheless, there's a grappling here of trying to turn Esther, who seems, in the Pshat level, one could argue, somewhat of a compromised figure. No, in reality, she didn't do anything wrong, and whatever she did was entirely kadas ukadim, was entirely kosher in every sense of the word. So Esther is chosen as the queen, Esther is not chosen. Esther is taken to the king's palace, and we continue. Every single day, Mordechai would go to the courtyard of the women's quarters, and he would ask about how Esther was doing and what was being done with her. Uvahagia Torah Nara Lavo Lamelech Achashverosh. And when the turn came for every woman to go to the king Achashverosh, Miketz Hayosla Kedas Hanashim Shnei Masar Chodesh, they would be preparing her for 12 months. Kikein Yimlu Yimei Mirukehen Shisha Chadashim Mishaman Hamor V'Shisha Chadashim Babasamim Uvisamruka Hanashim. So they would put on these perfumes and oil and different kinds of cosmetics for 6 months of one kind of oil and 6 months of other kinds of cosmetics. That will be the preparation. And after that, the girl would go to the king, and whatever she wanted, that's what they would give her to go with her to the king. And she would go at night and would leave the next morning, return to the house of the women, to Shashgaz, another person. He would guard the Pilagshim, the concubines of the king. And she would never go back to the king unless he wanted that specific woman and would call her by name. Now, when it came Esther's turn, it was now her turn to go to the king. She didn't want anything. She only wanted to take what Haggai told her that she absolutely must take. And Esther was very popular. She was admired by every single person who saw her. She was very likable. And Esther was taken to King Achashverosh, al-Beis Malchusa, to the royal palace, b'chodesh ha'asiri hu chodesh Teves, in the 10th month, which is the month of Teves. Next class, we'll talk about that, why the months are mentioned twice. In the 10th month, the month of Teves. What's the deal with why can't we just say in the 10th month or in the month of Teves? Why do we need to mention both? We'll hopefully talk about that next time. Bishna Sheva l'Malchusa, in the 7th year of his reign. V'ye'ahav HaMelech, as Esther, and the king loved Esther, mikol hanashim, more than any other woman. And he liked her more than all the other virgins. Vayasam keser malchus barosha, he placed the royal crown on her head. Ba'imlicha tachas Vashti, and she was the queen instead of Vashti. Vayas hamelech mishta gadol. So now we have the second big party in the Megillah. Now the king made a second big party l'chol sarav v'avadav, for all of his officials and servants. Es mishta Esther, a party for Esther. V'hanachal lamedinos asa v'yitain mases kiyad hamelech. He gave gifts to many people around the nation, as befits a king. When they gathered the virgins a second time, Mordechai Yoshev b'shar Melech, Mordechai was sitting at the king's gate. Ein Esther magedes molataves ama. Esther nevertheless did not tell her. She did not tell that she was Jewish. She did not tell who her people were. Kasher tziva aleha Mordechai, as Mordechai had decreed to her. This Mamre Mordechai Esther asa. Esther did what Mordechai told her to do. Kasher haisa ba'amna ito, as she did when she was living in his house, when she was growing up under Mordechai as an adoptive father. So now on this pasuk, also very interestingly, also from the Gemara and Megillah, what was it that Mordechai told Esther to do? According to the Pshat in the Megillah, it seems to be told her not to tell that she's Jewish. But according to Rabbi Yirmiyah in Megillah, in the Gemara Megillah, it says that shehaisa mara dam nida lachachamim, that she would show her dam nida, the blood of nida, to the chachamim, to the rabbis. So we have here from the beginning, as I said, Esther, according to the Megillah, was keeping Shabbos because she had 7 maids and they were helping her keep Shabbos. She was keeping kosher, at least according to 2 of the 3 opinions we've seen in the Gemara. She was even keeping taros mishpacha, nida, in some way, according to this opinion of Rabbi Yirmiyah in the Gemara. So we have a girl who, in the Megillah itself, it doesn't say any of these things, but the Gemara now adds these details. She's keeping Shabbos, Kashrus, Taras Mishpacha, which incidentally are the three main categories they teach you in Wayu Smicha, these three areas of Jewish halacha. So it's very interesting how we have this person who now the Gemara is adding all these details and telling us that really, although she's hiding her nationality, she's doing all that she can to keep halacha however she can. Now we come the next three psukim, and what I want to focus on for the rest of this year is really a turning point, a very important event that happens in the Megillah, and something that will come up with major ramifications in a few chapters down the line. Bayamim Mahim. It was in those days. Mordechai Yoshev B'Shar HaMelech. Mordechai was sitting at the gate of the king. Katzaf Bigsan Vaseresh. Bigsan and Seresh got angry. Shnei Srisa HaMelech. They were two of his guards. Mishomer Hasaf. Vayevakshu l'shloach yad b'melech Achashverosh. They wanted to extend a hand to King Achashverosh, not a hand to help him stand up, but a hand to kill him. They wanted to kill Bigsan and Seresh. Now were plotting to kill the king. Vayivada hadavar leMordechai, and this became known to Mordechai. Vayagid leEsther Hamalka, and he let Esther Hamalka know about the plot. But Tomer Esther lamelech b'shem Mordechai, and the queen told the king in the name of Mordechai. And that b'shem Mordechai is going to be so important later, as we'll see. And you probably already know what's going to happen, but we will see that later play out in the Megillah. Vayivukash hadavar, and the matter was investigated. Vayimatze, and it turned out to be true. Vayitalu shnehem al eitz, and they either hung or impaled them both on stakes or on a gallows. Vayikasev b'sefer divrei hayamim lefnei hamelech, and this was recorded in the history books before the king. Now, I want to talk about this practice because it wasn't that they were killed through hanging, as some people believe. It wasn't that they were. We don't know how they were killed, but this that the Megillah is telling us, Vayitalu shnehem al eitz, they were hung on the tree or they were impaled on a stake. What they were doing was they were displaying their body to show that these were very shameful and horrible criminals, and that's the way they used to treat criminals. They're very, very bad people who were executed by the king, and that's what they used to do in that time. So I want to quote here from Herodotus. We spoke about him a few times. He lived during or very close to the time of the Purim story, and Herodotus in the histories has a section where he talks about King Xerxes. As we said, King Xerxes was associated with Achashverosh, and he writes the following in the Histories, Book 7. It says, Xerxes passed over the place where the dead lay. This was in the middle of a battle, the big war, and gave orders to cut off Leonidas' head and to impale it. It is plain to me that while Leonidas lived, King Xerxes was more incensed against him than against all others. Otherwise, he would never have dealt so outrageously with his dead body. For the Persians are beyond all men known in the habit of honoring valiant warriors. Again, the Persians are beyond all men known in the habit of honoring valiant warriors. So we have here, according to Herodotus, this practice of impaling either the body or at least the head and putting it up to show people that this person did something exceptionally bad. And Xerxes was very, very angry at Leonidas, and that's why he did this to this person. He wanted to disgrace him and to shame him and to embarrass him even after he had been killed. Now, this doesn't only exist in the Persians and not only in Esther. It appears several other times in Tanakh. So I want to give a few examples of this where disgraced and executed criminals get either impaled or hung after they're killed. So in Bereshis, in the Yosef story, Yosef correctly interprets that Paro would impale his baker. It's not that he would hang his baker to death and that's how he killed him, but rather that he would kill the baker and then hang his body in shame. That's one example. In Sefer Yoshua impaled 6 kings in total on 2 separate occasions during his conquest of the land of Israel. Then in Shmuel Aleph, when the Plishtim found King Shaul and Shaul was killed, they impaled Shaul's dead body. Later in the book of Shmuel, when a famine hit during King David's reign, God told him that it came as a punishment. Punishment for what? Punishment for King Shaul attempting to exterminate the Giv Onim, a group of people who we don't have the time currently to talk about, but a certain group of people who accepted Judaism, who converted to Judaism only because they were afraid of certain things happening to them. So King Shaul didn't like this group of people and wanted to kill them out, and was not successful. But God was not happy with this and sent a famine during King David's reign. And King David HaMelech sought counsel with the Givonim. And what did the Givonim ask for? They asked that they wanted to kill 7 of Shaul's children and to impale them after they had been killed. And David, now really overblown by this famine and not knowing what to do, hands over the 7 people, 7 of King Shaul's children, and that's exactly what the Givonim did. Now in Esther, the book of Esther, this practice is mentioned at least 4 times. This is only the first one. Bigsan and Sarash, they're either impaled or they're hanged for plotting against the king. In the second, Haman plotted to have Mordechai killed and hung on the gallows. In the third, Haman was actually hung on the gallows that he prepared for Mordechai. And fourth, Haman's 10 sons were impaled as well. And finally, at least one other place in Tanakh, in the book of Ezra, when King Darius decreed that Bayis Sheni should be rebuilt, he wrote that anyone who alters this decree should be impaled on a beam removed from that person's house. And the King Darius, we know from other sources as well, from Herodotus again, that this was a form of not, it wasn't execution, it wasn't capital punishment, but this was a practice that he did to embarrass people, to deter them from rebelling against him. And again, Herodotus writes in book 3, when Darius was master of the Babylonians, in other words, when he had conquered the Babylonians, when Darius, king of Persia, conquered the Babylonians, he destroyed their walls and tore away all their gates, neither of which Cyrus had done at the first taking of Babylon. So this was a second campaign against Babylon, which Darius was now doing. And now he had conquered over the Babylonians. And so he first destroyed their walls, tore away their gates. And moreover, he impaled about 3,000 men that were prominent among them. So while in the entire Tanakh, there are only a total of, I believe, 28 people who are impaled, we have this story of in Herodotus about Darius impaling a total of 3,000 Babylonians in one go. Now, there is a mitzvah that I want to mention in this context, that we don't impale executed criminals, but we do hang them, and not hang them through their neck. What we do is we tie the corpse's hands and hang them over a certain pole. We hang them over and we take them down immediately. Now, this is only done for 2 kinds of criminals, those who curse God and those who commit avodah zarah. But they're also mitzvah, and that's a mitzvah in the Torah, by the way. It's brought down in the Sefer HaChinuch, in the middle of Sefer Devarim, in the Rambam, and a few other places. But there are also mitzvahs that we never leave them up overnight, and that we also bury them the same day. In fact, we learned about the mitzvah of burial itself from the fact that the Torah commands us to bury these criminals. I once interviewed a rabbi from an organization which helps people pay for burial if they can't afford it. And he said there's something beautiful in the fact that the dignity that Judaism extends to all people is learned from the fact that, we bury people as a form of dignifying their body. We don't want to leave it out to get decomposed in front of us so it becomes smelly and disgusting. We bury it right away as a form of honoring the person and giving them a bit of human dignity. And the fact that we learned that from the case of criminals, that we bury these criminals, the worst kinds of criminals, those who curse God and commit idolatry, there's something beautiful in that, and that the dignity is extended to all people, even people who maybe we don't like as much when they were alive. So what is the mitzvah itself? What they would do is they would tie the person's hands and hang the body near sunset, take it down immediately and bury it next to the wood that they hung them on, along with all the materials they use for the execution. And the Sefer HaChinuch writes that the purpose of this mitzvah is so that this criminal will serve as a deterrent against future crime. And this idea of there being a deterrent, of us doing something to one person as a deterrent for other people committing crime, raises a really interesting moral and legal question about the purpose of punishment in general. So first of all, does capital punishment deter crime at all? And there's a four-way machlokas, really interesting four-way machlokas in the Mishnah and Makos on this very question. And the Mishnah in Makos is talking about a Sanhedrin that kills people and talking about capital punishment in a Jewish court. And the 4 opinions are as follows. The first is an anonymous opinion. We don't know who said it. But it says that a Sanhedrin that kills one person in 7 years is known as a murderous court. In other words, if there's a Sanhedrin that is so gung-ho on killing people for any crime they might commit, whatever it may be. And there are people who, and the Sanhedrin is not good enough to prevent the crime from being committed in the first place. And one person every 7 years is killed. That's known as a murderous court. It's a pretty remarkable statement. Second opinion by Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says it's not 1 in 7 years that makes a court a murderous court. It's one person every 70 years, which really comes down to less than one every generation, once every few generations. That's how many people a court can kill. And if they kill any more than that, they're known as a murderous court. Finally, third opinion, even more extreme than that, Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva, they both say that if they were on the Sanhedrin, they would never kill anyone. Not only not once in 70 years, not only not once in 7 years, but they would never kill anyone. They would always find a way to exonerate the person and to find another way around it that they would never have to kill him. And finally, a dissenting opinion. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says that these two people, probably referring to Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva, are increasing murderers in Israel. In other words, the fact that they would never kill anyone means that they're taking away the deterrent of capital punishment, that other criminals are going to see what happens, that, other people were not killed and they got away with it. They weren't killed by the court. So I don't need to be too careful. I can do whatever I want. I can kill whoever I want. So really interesting machlokas on whether capital punishment is seen as a deterrent or not. Clearly, Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva don't think it's a deterrent because they don't kill. They say we don't kill. Either it's not a deterrent or it's not worth it as a deterrent, which is itself an interesting suggestion. But Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is clearly saying that no, we need this deterrent and we need to kill people once in a while because, and not just people, but we need to kill real hard criminals and terrible people once in a while because that serves as a deterrent and makes crime happen less often, not more often. Rabbi Chanina Sagan HaKohanim in Avos 3:2 seems to agree with Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel with this extreme position that we want it as a deterrent because he says that you have to pray for the welfare of the government, because without the government, if there was no fear of the government, people would swallow each other alive, which is interesting. People would swallow each other alive if they were not so afraid of the government that the government would do something to them. Now, I want to point out that all of these names that I mentioned, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, and Rabbi Chanina Sagan HaKohanim, these are all Tanaim to whom this wasn't a merely theoretical question. They lived during the time of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, and the Bar Kokhba rebellion was against the Roman government, Roman Empire, which was one of the most brutal, horrible governments in history. Jews don't really think about this as often as Christians do, and Christians don't really think about it as often as they should. But the Roman preferred method of execution was crucifixion. And it's really, if you think about it, a terrible way to die. It takes days and days and days. And often people don't even die from the wounds. They die from not being able to breathe enough to pick up their own body weight, because that's how they're held up. It's a really gruesome way to die. Sometimes they die from animals that are around that attack them while they're up on the cross and can't defend themselves. It's quite barbaric. And so these Tanaim are living during the time of the Roman government. And furthermore, we know that several of these rabbis were themselves killed by the Roman government. So there's a kina called Eila Eskara, which is said by some Jewish communities on Tisha B'Av, on Yom Kippur, or on Erev Rosh Hashanah. And in Eila Eskara, it mentions what's known as the Asara Harugei Malchus, the 10 rabbis who were martyred by the kingdom. By the kingship is referring to the Romans in this case. And Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Akiva says he would never kill anyone. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says you have to kill them, otherwise they're going to be there will be more murderers in Israel. They're both listed among the people who were killed, among the Asar Harugei Malchus. Now, Rabbi Akiva, the way his death is described is absolutely brutal. I'm not going to go into how his death is described, but it's quite gruesome. Furthermore, one opinion in Eicha Rabbah 2:4 lists Rabbi Tarfon, who agreed with Rabbi Akiva, among these as well. And according to the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Chanina Sagan HaKohanim from Avos, who said you need to pray for the welfare of the government, and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who said that capital punishment is necessary. So these are two rabbis who they share the opinion that you need a strong government for society to function. According to the Shulchan Aruch, they were both martyred on the very same day. So this is not a theoretical conversation. These are people who are seeing the effects of one of the most brutal governments in history in terms of the way they would kill people. And as we've seen, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon says, we would never kill anyone. And you can understand why they would say that, because they're seeing the way that the Roman government is killing people and the bloodlust and the brutality and the terrible nature of the way they were killing people. So Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon, we don't want any part of that. It's remarkable that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Chanina Sagan HaKohanim are saying that, no, you need capital punishment, or that you should even pray for the welfare of the government, because as bad as this is, it would have been worse if we didn't have the government and everyone was allowed to do whatever they wanted. So it's a really intense conversation that they're having, and very non-theoretical, very practical, a very real lived discussion that they're having. So clearly in the Jewish sources, the opinion that took hold was the idea that that you need this kind of that the purpose of capital punishment is as a deterrent. And that's not entirely surprising, because during the exiles, during the time that the Jews were in Galus since the destruction of Churban Bayis Sheni, they were almost always better under a strong government. And when there was a strong government, even if the government did oppress the Jews a little bit, it also prevented other people, non-state actors, as we might call them, from oppressing the Jews as well. And to the Jews, that was a better thing. It was a better thing to have a strong government, even a government that wasn't entirely friendly to them, that might have done some things that, raised taxes or confiscated their books or censored or whatever it might have been. But that was better than the complete anarchy of just allowing the local people, the local non-Jewish community, to just wreak havoc and destroy stores and loot and do whatever they wanted. So the Jews are very much mostly of the opinion that you need a strong government, and that the punishments that the government deals out serve as an important deterrent. I'm going to quote from Rambam now, from Moreh Nevuchim, Guide 335. He says the following. He says that if a criminal is not punished, none of those who design aggression will be deterred. No one is as weak-minded as those who deem that the abolition of punishments will be merciful. On the contrary, this will be cruelty. In other words, it will be cruelty to abolish punishments, as well as the ruin of the order of the city. It will be terrible. It will be a horrible thing if you got rid of punishments and you didn't allow the government to punish these people and to deter crime from happening in the future. It would completely ruin the order of the city, and it would be cruelty to not engage in legal punishment, even up to the point of capital punishment. In Western philosophy, Plato, who lived shortly after the Purim story, only about 100 years later, and David Hume both say the same thing. They say that the function of punishment serves as a deterrent, and that deterrent is very important. David Hume even says that when a person breaks the law to a certain extent, the ordinary rules of justice are temporarily suspended, and it becomes proper for the benefit of society. It becomes proper for the benefit of society to inflict suffering on him, which in any other circumstance would have been considered injustice or a violation of his rights. And Plato says very similarly, they both have this similar kind of idea about punishment serving as a deterrent. But Immanuel Kant, and this is an interesting counterpoint, and I have to say there's a lot to be said for this, in his book Philosophy of Law, says that punishment can never be administered merely as a means for promoting another good, but must in all cases be imposed only because the individual has committed a crime, and one man ought never to be dealt with merely as a means to the purpose of another. So I'll try to explain what that means. He says that if you want to say that you have to punish person A, the only reason you should be punishing person A is because person A deserves to be punished. If you want to say you want to punish person A because that'll prevent person B from doing the same sin, then what does that have to do with person A? That's completely unjust. It's not person A's fault that person B might do the crime or might not. So therefore, if you punish person A because person B might do a crime, then that's using person B as a means, which is, it seems to what he's saying is that it's an effect and a ruin to his own personal dignity, and it's not right. And therefore, you should never use punishment as a deterrent at all. So this is a fascinating moral question. What is the purpose of legal punishment? Why do we punish people under the law? And specifically capital punishment. Why do we kill people? So recently I was in Puerto Rico, and I was approached by a very wonderful man who was very hospitable to me and my friends while we were there. a dear friend now, Tzvi Goldstein, and he raised this question to me. He says, why does Judaism promote capital punishment? Why do we have the idea of capital punishment in the Torah? So we had a discussion, and based on various mitzvos and psukim and other sources in Chazal, we came up with 6 or 7 different reasons for why we might want to kill criminals. So I want to just give this list, and then we'll end here. If there anyone has any comments or questions, I'd be fascinated to hear and continue this discussion. So the 7 reasons why we have capital punishment for different sources in the Torah and Chazal. Number 1, to deter future crime. As we discussed, it's a deterrent. Number 2, to punish the criminal. The criminal did something wrong. They deserve to be punished, and that's what they're going to do. We need to kill them because they deserve this punishment. Number 3, to help them atone for the crime. There's some crimes that can only be atoned at the point of death, and specifically through certain kinds of death. And therefore, we want to kill the person because it serves as an atonement for the thing that they did wrong. So what's interesting about that suggestion is that it seems to be that capital punishment is not for the sake of anyone else, but really for the sake of the criminal. It's helpful to them. It's good for them because they don't want to die unatoned. They want to die atoned for their sins. So that's suggestion number 3, to atone for the crime. Number 3, to pacify the victim's family. There's the mitzvah of Goal Hadam, that if a person gets killed accidentally, he's allowed to go and seek out the murderer of his family member, and to even kill them in some cases. So in order to mollify, to pacify the victim's family, we have this idea of capital punishment. Number 5, we want to remove the criminal from society, and there's no better way of removing someone from society than by capital punishment. So if someone is really beyond the pale and cannot do tshuva and cannot be returned and can't integrate into society properly, we would want to remove them and kill them. Number 6, we want to appease God. God is upset when there are certain kinds of terrible sins, when people are murdering each other, when people are doing other kinds of terrible things, people are blaspheming, committing avodah zarah. God gets very upset. And so to appease God, we want to kill the person and take care of them in that way. And finally, doing a sin creates some cosmic damage. It does something to the universe. This is a more Kabbalistic concept, that when a sin is done, there are certain kinds of damages that are done in the world. And in order to repair that cosmic damage, we'd want to kill this person, and that might bring about an atonement and repair whatever damage they committed in the world. So again, to deter future crime, to punish the criminal, to atone for the crime, to pacify the victim's family, to remove the criminal from society, to appease God, or to repair their cosmic damage. These are some of the suggestions I came up with. And so with that, so back into the Megillah, we have this idea that Achashverosh had hung these the big son and Sarash, and we'll see this happen again a few more times. And as we've seen, this idea comes up in the Torah itself as a mitzvah, that we have, at least for a short time, to hang certain kinds of criminals who were killed, and therefore to serve as a deterrent, or maybe for some other reasons. And so we've discussed why is it that we have capital punishment in general. I've tried to offer some suggestions, but I'm open to hearing any more if anyone else has. And so with that, I think we're going to pause here. So before we end, I just want to point out that this story about Bixen and Sarash is going to be essential. And later, towards the end of the Megillah, towards the middle end, it'll come back and relate again and really promote and help the Jewish people bring about the salvation in the Purim story. And so it's mentioned here in only 3 psukim, as almost sounds like a bit of an afterthought, but it's going to come about later. And that's one of the things I mentioned in the first class, that Esther has all these themes. It's written like a real novel, and it's brilliant and wonderful and incredible in that way, much more than many other books in Tanakh. And so those are some of the themes that come across in this chapter. And next time we'll continue with chapter 3. And now we open the floor if anybody has any questions or comments. And if not, we will pause and continue next week.
I have a comment.
Yes, please.
Okay, so imagine for a moment, if somebody were to come to you, not to anybody, in general, and say, you know what, we're going to invite you to come to the White House for a party over there. There will be kosher food, we'll pay for your transportation, whatever, the whole 9 yards. I think that many people, not all, but many people would want to go, right? Now, similarly, let's say if you're in London and you were invited to the Royal Palace for a party and, whatever, you get to meet the king and, whatever, William and Kate and, whatever. I don't know. I mean, it's not my thing, but, yeah, there are people that say, yeah, I would love to go, especially if you're going to pay my transportation and pay the food and kosher food and everything and so forth. Okay, now, so that's just my thinking here in our lives today. But earlier in the lecture, it's just, I never thought about it. I never knew. When you mentioned that, like for the party at the royal palace, that they were going to bring a lot of virgins and stuff, that they did not want to go. I never thought about that. So they were forced to go to somewhere where they did not want to go, and to be with the king, they did not want to be with him.
Yeah, so that's based on the Gemara. The Gemara contrasts Achashverosh with David HaMelech. And he says that David HaMelech was very smart when he wanted to find a new bride. What he said was he announced throughout the entire kingdom that the king is looking for a bride. Whoever wants to bring their daughter, please bring their daughter. And so what did the people do? They flocked and they ran. Everyone wanted their daughter to be considered to be the queen and married to David HaMelech. But when Achashverosh did this, and this is what the Gemara talking, Achashverosh was very unintelligent. What he did was he sent out police and officers to every corner of the kingdom to bring them to the palace by force. So what did people do? They didn't flock to the palace. They tried to hide their daughters, and whoever could hide their daughters, they hid them. So this was kind of the idea there. And based on the Gemara, the Megillot itself doesn't exactly say this, but it seems to be implied that they're being forced to come. And whenever anyone's forced to do anything, especially something like this, it seems clear to me that they wouldn't want to come. But I appreciate that comment, that question. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you all for coming. We will continue next week with chapter 3. Take care, everyone. Have a great week.
Thank you so much. Take care. Good night.
Thank you.
Wait, stop the recording.